Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
Money and power and sex and blackmail, everyday plots on television, except when the drama is being played out by TV's so-called televangelists. Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, we're going to talk about the Jim and Tammy Bakker feud with Jimmy Swaggart and what's involved, the Oral Roberts ultimatum, and try to figure out what, if anything, this has to do with us. Our guests today are George Jones, who is Director of Religious Programs, Ball State University, Steve Johnson from the Department of Sociology at Ball State, and John Rouse, producer of Public Affairs Roundtable and a member of the Department of Political Science. George, who are these characters, these evangelical, fundamentalist, Pentecostal, charismatic, what do these labels mean and who are these people?
Well, the four terms overlap, but there are some distinctions in the terms. Probably the broadest term is evangelical. Evangelical probably designates those Christians who become Christians not by virtue of their birth or infant baptism, but those who, through some adult decision or a decision later in life, have chosen to follow Christ. And in that sense, most of the Christians in the United States would like to be known as evangelicals. Fundamentalist is a more restrictive term, which refers more to a group that in the 20th century began to oppose some of the impact of modern science and modern education on the church by re-emphasizing such fundamentals as the deity of Christ, the authority of the Bible, the necessity of that rebirth experience that I referred to. Pentecostals and charismatics are characterized by a particular kind of Christian experience that in the New Testament is called expression of gifts of the Spirit, the most notable one being speaking in tongues. The Pentecostals usually refer to those Protestant groups that became separate denominations starting about 1900, whereas charismatic refers primarily to a group since in the last 15-20 years, many of whom are inside mainline denominations. Probably as many as 10 million Roman Catholics are known as charismatics, who have experienced speaking in tongues and other, quote, gifts of the Spirit.
Where do our TV characters fit in here? How are Jim and Tammy different from Jimmy Swaggart, who are different from Oral Roberts, or are they all the same? Most
of them are Pentecostal. They come out of the Pentecostal denominations, notably the Assembly of God in the case of the Bakkers and Jimmy Swaggart. Others are charismatic in that they may belong to a mainline denomination. I think Robertson claims to be a Southern Baptist, although his basic orientation is with tongue speaking and other gifts of the Spirit such as that. Whereas Falwell is as a Baptist would fall into the fundamentalist group. The more successful ones have been the Pentecostals and the Charismatics.
As far as the breakdown is concerned in terms of how people in this country are churched, about 2.5% of the people are Jewish. 33% are called Evangelical Protestants. 23% are mainline Protestants. 9% are black Protestants. 25% are Roman Catholics. And the rest, 7.5%, don't have any particular persuasion as far as belief is concerned. So essentially this issue all began, I presume, about 1976 when Jimmy Carter ran for president. And George, correct me if I'm not correct, but I would say that Jimmy Carter and Jesse Jackson, for example, are evangelical Christians, whereas Jerry Falwell is a evangelical fundamentalist Christian, whereas Pat Robertson is a, if I can get it correct now, an evangelical fundamentalist Pentecostal charismatic Christian.
I think you've got all the levels there.
And I presume the larger question is, in terms of this program, because this program is a program that attempts to focus upon politics and culture and economics, these people, these tele-evangelists, are really getting into politics, they're getting into economics, they're raising considerable amounts of money, and they also have some influence in terms of social perspectives, abortion, school prayer. Those are the issues that come to mind. So in terms of that percentage that I gave, 33% evangelical Protestant, 23% mainline Protestant, the evangelicals do have some influence in society, or seem to at least.
Well, they have numbers, and historically the Christian faith has been very active in its influence on American society. It was not until what somebody's called the Great Schism, around 1900, when you had the fundamentalists pulling away from the rest of Protestants in the United States, that you had a retreat from the social and political issues in society. I don't think you can understand slavery and most of the reform movements in the 19th century if you don't study diligently the role of the churches in all of those movements.
I could probably comment on that, in that this is an area of research that I've delved into over about the last 6 or 7 years ago in studying Middletown, USA, that is Muncie, Indiana. And what we have found is that the people who believe in these rather conservative issues, anti-abortion issues, for school prayer, anti-homosexual, anti-ERA, or the Equal Rights Amendment for women, people who believe in those issues and also follow people like Jerry Falwell happen to be in a very much smaller minority. That is, the very conservative Christian fundamentalists, we have found, makes up a very small number of people. For example, in our surveys, we found that the percentage of people who support the moral majority or strongly support the moral majority is only probably about 5% in Muncie. So I would say that particular segment, which is part of what we call, a number of other people call, the Christian right, really makes up a very small percentage. In the elections in 1980, I know I've said this a number of times on the media in the Muncie area, but in 1980 and 1984 elections, the Christian right had very little to do with the election of Ronald Reagan. In fact, in 1984, we had some evidence that the presence of the moral majority had a negative impact. That is, Ronald Reagan would have won by even more if the moral majority would have been absent from the political scene in 1984. So I would say the basic point here is that the Christian right, people support Falwell and those types of people, make up a very small percentage certainly of the electorate.
But on the other hand, they seem to have some influence in terms of raising agendas. I would think that Pat Robertson really does not expect to be president, but he is attempting to raise a particular agenda, and he is keeping that agenda before the American people.
Indeed, they have an agenda, and it's gotten a lot of publicity, but if you notice in Congress, the kinds of things which these people are for, that is, for school prayer, anti-abortion amendments, and things like that, they have gotten nowhere. I mean, their political impact, certainly from my perspective and the data that I have collected, has been almost nil.
Okay, we've run the credits before the movie. Now the movie, the drama that is unfolding before us here, and has been for some weeks now. The Jim Bakker, Jimmy Swaggart feud, if we can call it that. The skeptic would say it obviously has to do with money, yet we hear a lot of moral posturing on television. George, what's at the root of the problem here?
Well, I think one thing is the root is just the very nature of human nature. TV evangelists are not any different than other people. They put on their pants the same way. They have the same drives and impulses and desires. I think it's only in the mind of the public that sometimes we think they're exempt from a lot of the temptations and feelings that each of us have every day. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect, I think, goes back into American history in the sense that when religion was deregulated in the United States, it was put entirely on its own to make its way and to sell its message, and therefore it has had to come up continually with new techniques and new ideas to market, if you want to put it in business terms, market itself. Early on, it was the revivals that became domesticated as Chautauqua societies. Religion has been one of the most innovative forces in American culture as a result of that. It's not surprising that with the development of the new technology of telecommunications that there were some people from the religious area that were ready to adapt to it, to capitalize on it, to attempt to use it. With direct mail, it became then a source of great power and money-making. And so I think the old ancient sins of greed and vice and avarice all came together in this. And individuals, isn't there a saying in the Bible that says, beware that when you think you stand, lest you fall? And I think it's happened again.
I think something else, it sort of makes me think of the phrase that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. As they have become to have more and more influence and money, it seems like their perspectives on life and the hereafter and all those kinds of issues have indeed become more absolute. A point I would add to George's points, of course, is the fact that they seem to have to, and I say these people seem to have to be correct or absolutely correct on every aspect of theology. It's almost as if they cannot be wrong, that their view is the view, and they don't seem to be able to make any amendments to that particular view. But I think the question beyond all that is, why do a certain number of people need this kind of focus to be able to watch the television programs, to give money to Heritage USA, to give money to these various ministries? Why do people indeed feel the need to make these kinds of contributions?
Well, one thing I've found when watching the shows is they're very entertaining. You know, they know all the techniques, so to speak, in presenting a good show. I mean, the singers are very good. The preachers are very good. They've got the best, you might say, on television. And just like I suppose we have the best in entertainment, some people probably would question that in prime time, whether we have the best entertainment or not. But I think that's certainly one factor which seems to lead to their appeal, is that they're just very good at it, at that type of thing. Would you agree with that, George?
Yeah, I think it's no accident that our speech department here at Ball State assigns students to watch these programs to see people who have mastered the techniques of communication.
I read an analysis of European reaction to I guess, the latest controversies involved. The view was expressed that perhaps the Europeans wouldn't put up with what they call some of these ayatollahs, these snake oil peddlers, that in fact in America we've gone an extreme in the other direction in such pursuit of religious freedom that we wouldn't think of putting reins on one of these people.
Yeah, we don't think today of religion being established in Europe, but there is still the lingering establishment of the Christian faith in Europe, and therefore they expect the church people to play the game, to get along with the authorities, the powers that be, not to upset things, and therefore, and not to do outrageous things, like ask for money on television and so forth. It's a product of the not only the freedom that churches have in the United States, but the necessity that they have to stand on their own feet and earn their own way. There's no government subsidy.
You know, the point that George made was that the religious focus in this country is completely deregulated. As you said, there is the establishment church. For example, the early leaders of our country, George Washington and so forth, were members of the established Episcopal Church, which was very close to the state.
Church of England, yes.
Yeah, so in a sense, our early leaders in this country, if they indeed were Christians, of course, Thomas Jefferson was a deist, they were institutionalized Christians, not fundamentalist Christians, but institutionalized Christians.
They were Christians because of their relationship to the church, to the state church, rather than because a lot of their personal ideals and principles conformed with what would be considered New Testament principles and ideals.
But I still want to get back to the point, why do people feel the need to give money? I'll give a personal illustration. I have an aunt that lives in Kannapolis, North Carolina. She's a shut-in. She lives about 50 miles from Heritage USA. She gives to this program, and what this program does for her, at least in my own opinion, it gets her through the night. And so all of us, in a sense, need something to rely upon to get us through the night. Some people, we have found out in society, rely upon alcohol. Others rely upon drugs. We know that those are very serious problems in society. But yet others have some other philosophy. So in a sense, in thinking about my aunt in Kannapolis, these people are her daily, or with her daily, because she is a shut-in. I mean, how many people come to see my aunt, for example? So after hearing her reason for giving the money to Jim Bakker and his group, it's a thing that helps her through the day. And I would assume that millions of Americans need the Jimmy Bakkers, the Swaggarts, to give meaning to their lives and to help them get them through the night and the day.
I might comment on that. George probably has a comment there as well. But our data has indicated that the people who watch these shows are elderly. And I think they serve an important function for elderly, because elderly simply are immobile, or many of them are immobile, and can't get out to church services. So I think a major segment of the audience of these religious TV shows happen to be elderly people.
I think another issue we could raise is the issue of what I would call cost-effective. Now, that's a very secular kind of term. The concept, at least in Christian theology, is to give a tithe, or 1/10. But I would think that certain of these people are giving more than 1/10, and so the issue is, in a sense, is it cost-effective? In other words, is it cost-effective for my aunt to give away her life savings, if indeed she's doing that? Is it cost-effective? Could she do it? You know, could she get salvation for a cheaper way? And I think this comes to another issue we talk about, and that's the issue of accountability for these people.
I think all of us seek meaning in our lives. You've indicated that for some people that's difficult, but identification with the successful and with the achievers is one way that people who are shut in or shut out can find that kind of meaning in their lives. And if they feel like they're contributing to somebody that is successful or that is achieving, that is making a difference, then that identification then becomes a means of their finding meaning in their life. And so I think there are a lot of ways of explaining the appeal at that.
What does a theme park or a water slide do for a John shut-in aunt in South Carolina? How does that fit into the mix?
Well, I think part of it's some of the trappings of success, of having made it in American life. I think there's also the idea that just because you're a Christian, it doesn't make you second class. You can go first class. And then there's also, I think, an element there is that fundamentalist Christians, one of the basic strands in their thinking has been separation from the evils of the world. And by developing their own entertainment centers, they can have fun without being tempted.
I'd like to probably interject another point here, maybe change the shift of conversation here, and that is probably the negative impact of all this. We've talked about, why do people watch these shows, and they're entertaining and what have you. It seems to me we could probably talk about how the impact of the Jimmy and Tammy Bakker incident, and probably bringing about a more negative view of these folks. For one thing, I might point out that the number of people who watch these shows, I think, has been greatly exaggerated, certainly by the televangelists themselves. A more objective analysis by the polling agencies Nielsen and the other groups have found that Oral Roberts probably has the greatest number, about 1.5 million people who watch them regularly, whereas Jim and Tammy Bakker, they say about 7 or 8 million. More objective analysis indicates that maybe 500,000 people watch these shows. So to start off with, I think the impact of these shows probably has been greatly exaggerated. Also, as a result of the Bakker incident, I think that the attraction of these people is going to go down significantly. In fact, one recent poll indicated that those people who contribute now, 1/4 of those people, said that they would cut back in their contributions as a result of the Jim and Tammy Bakker incident.
I was just going to modify a little bit of one of the things you said. I think the Nielsen ratings are based on broadcast television. And the thing that's been difficult to get listener census on have been through the cables, and Bakker particularly has become king of the cables by having his own network and several hundred affiliates, and so it's really hard to know what the listening audience is.
It's probably difficult to assess, but I think we could probably agree that the numbers are significantly less than the televangelists say they are.
I think the issue is one of accountability, credibility, and another phrase, believability. If my aunt, for example, in Kannapolis gets to the point where she has trouble believing not the scriptural implications for this, but the believability of the person. For example, once she finds out about the wealth that Jim Bakker has accumulated in terms of his homes here and there and yonder, perhaps the believability of the personality will become in question. And in that sense, she might cut back on her donations and start giving to the First Baptist Church.
Yeah, certainly all the dirty laundry is coming out about these people. I mean, I don't know. I guess we could probably question how many people really know that these people live extravagant lives. I mean, the Bakkers have about 3 homes. Pat Robertson has a beautiful home in Virginia. I mean, I suppose with this publicity, maybe more and more people will realize that, and we'll find out, I guess.
Well, I guess of all the appeals, the one that beats all previous appeals was Oral Roberts' ultimatum that if in fact he did not raise $8 million, in fact God would call him home. That seems, George, to be a rather desperate means of raising necessary money. I mean, have we come to that, and how can you top that one?
Well, the Oral Roberts empire has been in difficulty for several years.
Financial difficulty.
Financial difficulty, yeah. And I think it was an act of desperation on his part, although his true believers will feel that it was an act of faith, that we are accountable to God, and our lives are that intimately in the hands of God. So I can see both sides of that. I think it has lost him a lot of credibility, to use John's term, in public life, and his continued cash flow has depended upon that amount of credibility. And with the declining viewing audience, I think he's the one who's probably suffered the most in his viewing audience in the last few years. I see further financial difficulty for him. This one gift isn't going to bail him out.
Well, haven't these evangelists built empires for themselves? I mean, very expensive empires, not only expensive to create, but to maintain.
Oh, yeah.
That you have, whether they're theme parks or whether they're colleges and universities or whether it's a medical hospital, a worldwide ministry, that this is pretty big business and it takes pretty big bucks.
Yeah, status in the world's eyes, it depends on institutions that can be respected and identified with. It's probably no accident that almost all of them have started their own college, their own university, even Jimmy Swaggart. And to keep these institutions going costs a lot, as all of us who work in universities know. But it's kind of a grasping after the status establishment.
Are we at a peak? I mean, are we going to start seeing some failures? Are we going to start seeing some of these appeals not coming through? What's the future? I mean, it seems like there's been an awfully lot of money put out thus far, but will all these evangelists be able to maintain their programs?
No, because they're stealing sheep from each other to a large extent now. I think one of the things that some of the polling has shown is that it's been a fairly static market for about 8 years.
Yeah, I think that's why you found all this infighting as well. All this, like I said, the dirty laundry is coming out in the sense that these people are really great rivals for that buck out there. And that's why Swaggart's making all these negative statements about Bakker, and Bakker's making about Swaggart. It's, again, it seems to all this negative rivalry seems to be coming out.
But I would assert that they are raising agendas, again, that have an underlying theme that a lot of people have some nervous feelings about. Abortion, the lack of the influence of church in society. If you go back to early 1960s, when they outlawed official school prayers in schools, when they outlawed the abortion issue in 1973, these are the flag issues that they keep on raising. Now, they don't have solutions for them, but they keep on raising the agenda, and so they apparently can pull in money based upon these appeals, and so this whole movement is a response to the the secularization, the secular humanism, as they would call it, the secularization of American society, where the society handles issues of welfare and things of this sort, and the churches do not. So it seems to me they're going to continue to have influence as long as they can touch, at least in a tangent kind of way, the feelings of a broader perspective.
Steve, in your polling here in Muncie, didn't you find a phenomenon that you called cultural fundamentalism a much bigger phenomenon than religious fundamentalism?
That's a good point. In fact, John is getting at an important point. The basic traditional values, for example, bringing prayer back in school tends to be a very popular issue. That is one factor that indeed has a broad support.
And behind that's concern for people being responsible for their own actions, the work ethic, some of the other...
Yeah, more traditional kind of family life. Style is something that does generally have a great deal of broad support. In fact, some people have argued that the Christian right gained popularity and gained some power because of this popular issue, that the economic right, so to speak, brought these people on in 1980 and 84, to support their candidate, Ronald Reagan, because this was a very popular issue. This traditional family value issue was something very important and something that had broad appeal, and they figure if the economic conservatives could get connected with that, that would bring more support for their particular agenda, that is free enterprise, reduction in government regulation, and that type of thing.
So in one sense, President Carter reintroduced evangelical fundamentalist Christianity to the political scene. But his politics and his economics were too liberal, and so this other group have come in to essentially to co-opt it for their own ends.
That's right. They thought that this particular individual who professed to be a born-again Christian really had a number of other types of values and agendas that they just totally disagreed with, a much too liberal agenda for them. And I think that was a stimulus, the fact that Carter came along and said he was an evangelical Christian, did not believe in the same things they did.
I'm sorry, gentlemen. We're out of time here today. Thanks to our guest, Steve Johnson from Sociology, George Jones, Director of Religious Programs at Ball State, and John Rouse from Political Science. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for joining us.
If you have comments regarding this program, please address them to John Rouse, Box 149, Muncie, Indiana, 47305. The producer for Public Affairs Roundtable is John Rouse. Associate producers are Bill Mosier and Mike Seaborg. This program is a production of University Media Services, the Department of Political Science, and radio and television stations on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.